If organizations like Omega Psi Phi are only allowing the best of the best, and some of the best are sitting by and allowing things like that to happen, what does that say about the organization? What does that say about the culture? What does that have to say about Omega herself? Let's talk about it.
Y'all already know what time it is. I got the black V-neck on.
What is going on, you all? I want to take the time to talk about this very tragic situation that has happened with a student from Southern University by the name of Caleb Wilson. Caleb Wilson was a 20-year-old Southern University student who also was in the band, who lost his life, who not only lost his life, but we could say, and it could be argued, that he was unalived. And I think that is very important for us to say. The word that I do want to say, I cannot say on this platform, but we need to use the right language to describe what has happened to him. This was not an accident. This was not a freak accident. This was not something that happened because people were not paying attention. This was something that was very intentional, and it speaks to the culture, not only with Omega Psi Phi, but from sororities and fraternities in general. Why are we still okay with things like this happening this far along? For the people who are arguing and saying that this is fraternity business, this is not our place to speak on, it is our business. If we're being technical right now in this moment, Caleb Wilson is not a member of Omega Psi Phi. He did not cross. He is one of us. He is a non-member who lost his life in the process. He lost his life due to members doing something that has been banned and is illegal. Something that even Omega Psi Phi has pushed back and has policies against hazing itself. In September of 2022, Omega Psi Phi implemented an anti-hazing policy. And in this policy, it goes against all of the things that happened to Caleb Wilson. This man lost his life to hazing. And for the Greek folks who are arguing and saying that this does not happen that often, and maybe only 1% of hazing incidents turn into something like this, what does it say when an organization or us as people are willing to sacrifice Black people in the pursuit of Black excellence, in the pursuit of being a part of this group, this fraternity, this thing, this idea? We are willing to not only put folks in harm's way, but some people may be left to be unalived. What does that say? What does it say about the organization that you have people working under? What does it say that people who are the best of this organization are carrying on things like this under the name? So I will argue that Omega Psi Phi at this point should be banned. We have given you all plenty of time over the last 20 years to fix this culture. We are aware of all of the conversations about things that happen on campuses across colleges and universities across the United States that are happening to Black folks. And not just Black men, but also Black women. We've heard silently, the same way we've heard silently when it came to Diddy and his accusations about fraternities doing things to women. We've seen these stories. We've seen movies being produced on stuff like this. Burning Sands, that came out on Netflix back in 2017, is basically this entire story. What was reported from the beginning, come to find out, was a lie. The persons who were responsible orchestrated a story to make it seem as though this man was part of a ritual that was happening outside in the public at a park, as if he was outside working out and collapsed. When now we're finding out that this situation happened at a warehouse.
So in the middle of me filming this video, a report was released from a local news station in Baton Rouge that during their investigation, they found that the warehouse was being subleased. So not only was it being subleased, but the person who was leasing the warehouse just so happened to be a Omega as well. And their son is a Omega and is a current student at Southern University. Yeah, it's not looking good.
They did not call 911. They dropped him off to the hospital. That is the same thing that happened in the movie Burning Sands about Greek life and crossing. That movie is based off of the director's experience of his organization. His organization. So the fact that this movie is 8 years old and this story is still here, what does that say? What does it say when this person who was trying to cross, his brothers were more worried about protecting themselves and protecting the organization than protecting and making sure that the person they just harmed was still alive? Because dropping somebody off at the hospital after punching someone in the chest for a hazing incident is beyond inhuman. What does that say when the people who are in charge of these things are allowing these things to happen? Because if Omega Psi Phi is coming down with an anti-hazing policy that was introduced 3 years ago, and we're still seeing people do that, what does it mean? If people are still carrying out these things underground, the culture is still there. What did we know about the culture? We cannot reform this. We cannot reform this type of behavior. There's no reforming this. So while we examine the culture around hazing and Greek life, we must remember that the founders never intended for hazing to be a part of the initiation process. So much that 70 years ago in the 1950s, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated took an official position against hazing as a fraternity activity. The anti-hazing position remains in effect today, and the policy banning hazing has been strengthened. And not only did Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated make sure to take a strong stance against hazing, they, along with the National Panhellenic Council, which includes the other Divine Nine organizations, took a stance against hazing at least since the 1990s. So the fact that this is still going on and all of these Divine Nine organizations have came out with policies and taken a stance against hazing, and these things are still happening. Why is that? Universities and colleges across the country have implemented bans after incidents like this have happened in the past 3 years, couple years, but the culture always comes back. If there is anybody who is qualified to speak on this, because I am not a member of any of these organizations, but I am a part of one of the biggest fraternities, one of the biggest organizations that are harmful to people across the globe, and that is the United States Army. Everything that is happening with these hazing incidents are things that I experienced in boot camp, stuff that I experienced in basic training for 9 weeks. So the stuff that you all are doing for these couple of weeks, I did that. And I also was paid to do these things. And we can get into the conversation about how these things even happen, because when the military is recruiting new soldiers, they're not getting people in their 30s or in their late 20s to be a part. They're getting the most vulnerable. Teenagers who are straight out of high school. We understand that even though you are 18, that prefrontal cortex is not fully developed enough for you to make the best of decisions. And the military industrial complex knows these things. That's why they have all types of ways to get young folks to sign up. The Air Force commercials that we see of them flying planes, knowing that a lot of the folks who sign up for the Air Force will never be able to fly a plane. It will not happen. Knowing that the Army does commercials of folks jumping out of planes and doing all this, when a lot of people who are signing up will never get a chance to experience that type of level of work. They make it seem as though it's a fun mission, something like Call of Duty, which the Department of Defense The military, whatever you want to call it, has a whole department that is dedicated to working with studios to bring the military in a good light in their movies. Yes, you can use our tanks and our weapons and everything in this movie, but you got to make us look like the good guys. That's why we get movies like Transformers and we see the military in there looking good. And the reason why I'm bringing up the military in this is because young kids who are on their way to college are being recruited for these organizations. And I believe, this is my theory, this is one of the reasons why you don't see people take folks who cross during grad chapters serious, because they did not go through the hazing process. Because a lot of folks who are in graduate school are older. They have careers. They're not going to be participating in these type of things. You're not going to be able to persuade them as easy to participate in these things. And they're just not going to do it. But if you can get a 19, 20-year-old to participate in these things and feel as though they have to, because a teacher who was on Twitter, who recently deleted his tweet, who is an alpha, talked about consent, that students who participate in these things are consenting. How can a 19-year-old consent to this? As if we don't understand how peer pressure and power dynamics work. To say that is to say that Caleb Wilson consented to being unalived. And I want someone who is a teacher out in Texas, who is working with young youth, to understand this is very disgusting ideology and it's very dangerous. I want to speak directly to the members of Omega Psi Phi, and I want you all to pull up your History of Omega Psi Phi book, and I want you to read some of these sentences with me. In 1940, Omega faces the future. She faces the future strengthened by her experience with the past, having learned to fight without wavering until victory. She looks at the discriminations practiced upon Negro in education, politics, labor, civil service, public utilities, in places of amusement and business, on the stage, in the United States Army and Navy, in the church, and in residential segregation. She sees these injustices and is not silent. The oracle, the voice of Omega, speaks. It speaks condemning racial inequality and points the way to justice, to democracy, and the brotherhood of man. I want us to come back to injustice, because I feel like that is very, very important, because what happened was injustice. And the members of Omega Psi Phi saw this injustice happening. Not only did they see it happening, they were also partaking in it. They were also pressuring folks to do these type of things. So what does that say? That the best of the best that you have chosen to be a member of your organization are out here carrying out these things, and done these things to this man and allowed him to be harmed and did not make sure he was okay. What does that say? What does it say when the people in this organization who were implementing these things, were participating in hazing, saw these things happening, were participating in these things, and didn't even feel the need to call 911 because they understood what they were doing was injustice and that there would be punishment for it? And not just on them, but also on the organization itself. So the organization and the people came first before the life that you all took. What does that say about the culture? What does that say about the culture of this whole institution? And you all can do all of the soul searching you need to do to justify this, but Omega has already spoken years ago about this very thing, that if you see injustice, it should be called out. And they did even make a call. They dropped this man off. The same scene that we saw in the Burning Sands. The same scene that we saw in that movie. And I want to be clear in this video that we understand that this is not just a Omega Psi Phi issue. This is not just a Black fraternity issue. This is not just a Black fraternity and sorority issue. It is a issue with the culture itself, because this is not something that is specific to Black fraternities and sororities. This is sororities and fraternities alike. And for the people who may argue that you do not see these type of things happen with white fraternities and sororities, I want to remind folks that this does happen across the board because of the culture. And if we get into the culture, a lot of the culture around hazing comes from the military itself. The mental and physical and psychological things that they do is heavy on what I experienced in basic training. But this is not something specific to Black fraternities and sororities. There was a movie that was written and produced called Fraternity Row that was released in 1977. This movie that talks about Greek life, and you see these men being paddled and disciplined to be a part of this fraternity. This movie is considered to be based off of the hazing death of Richard Swanson, a student who lost his life trying to pledge. He was a white student that lost his life. He choked to death trying to swallow a liver. So this type of culture is not specific, and I don't want to fall into the anti-Blackness of it all and say this is something that Black folks do because they're more harmful or whatever, and even trying to fall into the thing of Omega Psi Phi being way more dark than the other fraternities and sororities, because it's the culture that we need to be talking about. We can get into the anti-Blackness and this being a part of that. What is the purpose of the state taking lives when y'all are out here doing it? If we're saying we're okay with abandoning life, Black bodies in the pursuit of betterness, what different are you than the state? If we're being honest, what difference are you from the police department? And while we're talking about the police department and the state itself, let us not forget the 3 members of Omega Psi Phi who were police officers who fatally beat Tyree Nichols. These 3 police officers who are Black, who are police officers in Memphis, beat a man. What does that say? This is the best of your best. What does that say? Let's talk about it.